One thing that I've noticed about a lot of people in this industry, whether they're existing coaches or practitioners, or maybe they're just getting started, is this feeling in many of us where the term coach kind of just creates a little bit of cringe in us. And I want to address this head on today because it's something that I've heard not just through my development of the Psychodynamic Coach Academy. It's something I've actually heard even as my time when I was working more in business coaching and marketing and just general life coaching. There was this sort of feeling where people have this real draw to help and support others at a deep level, but there's just something about the word coach that creates a little bit of cringe. And so I want to talk about this today. Let's give this some air because I think it's something that a lot of coaches secretly hold on to, or it's something that I feel kind of just holds people back from really putting themselves out there and owning what the hell they're here to do in the world. It's this kind of like, I don't want to be known as a coach. There's something about this word coach for many people, not everyone, obviously, but for many people just kind of makes their skin crawl. Let's talk about it. So I've been doing a lot of discovery calls recently for the next round of the Psychodynamic Coach Academy, which starts on the 22nd of June. And so I've heard this a little bit more. I've heard this kind of deep call to this work. And I also hear the same kind of, oh, I don't know about the word coach. Oh, it just doesn't quite fit me. And so I felt like I need to call this in today because I feel like when I talk to people around this, it really holds them back. It holds them back from actually just going out and doing the work that they're here to do in the world. I also think it's a little bit of a cover as well, if I'm honest, around some imposter syndrome and all of this sort of stuff, okay, which I'll talk about. But it can be a really easy thing, I think, for our conscious mind, for our ego to create stories around and to get tangled around too. Many of which, by the way, many of the stories and things that I'm going to unpack in this episode have a seed of truth in them. And this is the thing with the nature when we're working with the conscious mind and the ego, is that there's always an amplification and an exaggeration of that. Okay. So let's talk about this, okay? Because I think on the surface, there's something about where the term coach, being such a small word, doesn't quite capture the freaking enormity and the vision that undoubtedly you probably have, which is to really help people at a deeper level, to really help people at a soulful and spiritual level, and to really help people create lasting, transformative results in their life. Whether you're someone who's interested in, helping people with purpose and direction and meaning, or maybe you have more of a niche around, you're really interested in relationships, for example, or working with people around their career, whatever it happens to be. But there's something about it doesn't quite feel like a big enough term to kind of capture the sort of work that I want to do. And I'm going to talk about why that is, I think, in a moment. But just to sort of bring this to life a little bit, I also think that there's something on the surface about how the coaching industry as well, traditionally there's been a low barrier to entry. The term coach is not a protected title, for example, like the term psychologist is in some countries. The term coach, anyone can kind of call themselves a coach, essentially. And that is changing, by the way, which I'm going to talk about. But it sort of can feel like this low barrier to entry of this industry that is rapidly growing. And we're seeing that forecast for like over the next 10 years. It is rapidly growing, this coaching and personal development and wellness industry. But it can almost feel like, because there's a low barrier to entry traditionally, it can almost feel like a bit of a backward step, I think, to some, particularly for those who have trained really hard. Perhaps you have a professional career at the moment. You're someone, I work with a lot of lawyers and nurses and therapists and counselors and people who have trained in nutrition and even other modalities too, where it can almost feel like, I've done all of this training. How is calling me a coach really going to serve me going forward? And I hear that, as someone who trained and registered and did my 6 years to become recognized as a psychologist. It's definitely something I hear a lot around. Does this feel like a backward step? Is there something about this? So I want to unearth and give air to all of these little secret thoughts and little hidden feelings that many of us may have. And I know as well, some of us who have a particularly spiritual background, who have maybe trained in other modalities, for example, or just have really rich life experience too. There's something about the word coach, maybe from seeing or witnessing some bad actors in the space too, and people who maybe haven't been operating with integrity, that can kind of create a little bit of a little bit of cringe around this too. So this is kind of how it shows up, I find, just day to day when I'm talking to people. As I said, my own story too. I remember sort of wrestling a little bit with the term coach as well. And I was thinking, am I really a coach, or am I a consultant? Or am I someone who's more of a guide? Or am I, and you start kind of, am I a mentor? And you start kind of wrestling with these terms, right? Thinking that that's what's actually going to be the thing that makes the discomfort go away. And here's a hint, it never is, okay? It's not actually about the title that you give yourself. And so I want to kind of blow this open a little bit today. I want to give some gentle air to it as well. I want to just check in with, how do you feel, whether you're someone who's established in the industry, or maybe you're just getting started or considering a pivot into coaching. How do you feel about the term coach? Is it something that when you put your hand on your heart, hand on your belly, okay, and close your eyes, is it a term that fills you with excitement and possibility? Or is it something where you're like, doesn't quite capture what it is I'm here to do? Or are you someone where it's like, actually, I'd feel a bit kind of cringe or embarrassed or ashamed calling myself a coach? Where do you fit in that spectrum? Maybe just pause this recording and just check in with yourself now. So before I get into kind of the meat of this podcast, I did something I don't usually do, and that is I actually pulled an oracle card, okay? Because I thought, I'm planning out this episode, I'm scribbling all of my notes, I've got all my pages of notes here, I'm old school, I love writing stuff down, okay? And I'd recently just been sorting through all of my oracle card decks and things like that, and there was one in particular that was kind of winking at me right before this episode, as they do. And I thought, let me just do a quick shuffle and let me just see what comes out. And there were actually two cards that dropped. And one is, it's called The End, and the other one is Graduation. And this is from, by the way, this is from the Oracle of Portals deck by Tess Whitehurst. Beautiful deck. It's actually one of my newer decks. And by the way, I just find that things like Oracle cards are just so, like, you don't pour all of your kind of your sort of all of your decision making into your oracle cards. I'm like a real sort of an advocate around that. It's like, we don't give our power away to anything, and they can also provide just some really enlightening kind of little nuggets based on what it is that we're doing or talking about, and some guidance and things. Okay, so the end and graduation. And so the end card really talks about this kind of era of rebirth, specifically the death part. Okay, so what's coming to an end? What is it that's dying off? What's returning to the earth? Okay, so this sense of the end and entering this underworld space. And then followed by the graduation, which I just thought was really interesting, because there's something about the graduation piece that speaks to this sort of cycle of learning that's been completed. And as I kind of ponder this as it relates to this topic, okay, why do so many coaches, why do they secretly not want to be called coaches? What is it about that? And actually, what I think is happening here is this isn't about the term freaking coach. What I'm noticing for people, particularly the people drawn to the sort of depth coaching space, the psychodynamic space, I see this in the psychology sort of coaching space, okay, is that people are done with this surface level kind of superficial coaching space that I think has dominated for the last decade. All right. When I think about the journey undoubtedly probably many of us have been on, whether you've worked with your own coach or maybe you've done some online courses and you've been engaged in personal and spiritual development, you've probably seen by now that much, obviously not all, there's some amazing stuff out there, but so much of what is out there feels quite diluted. It's kind of pop spirituality, or it's the kind of the 5 steps to make yourself feel good in the morning, or there's a lot of tearing each other down and a lot of polarization as people really try and build a name or a brand for themselves in this space. It's like, well, to do that, I need to kind of build my brand on top of all of the bodies of the other brands and tell everyone. And so there's a lot of this infighting and stuff that happens too. And I think as I think about that kind of that death and that graduation card, I can't help but think there's something deeply symbolic in that around what we're all feeling around this industry. I think there are so many incredible, heart-centered, the majority of people, I think it is interesting, incredible and heart-centered, okay? And I also think that it's been absolutely overtaken with surface level frameworks, quick fix hacks, how to optimize and how to, kind of make yourself perform better, and motivational and cheerleading sort of tactics and stuff, all of which can be helpful, okay? But I think we're kind of going through this maturity cycle in the industry at the moment where we realize we've experienced enough of that by now to know that actually a lot of that stuff doesn't quite stick long term. It might make us feel a little bit better in the short term. It might give us a little pop of energy and motivation. We might decide to set some new goals and create some new habits that maybe stick for a week or two. And then suddenly we find ourselves slipping back to where we were. And so I kind of think, and this is kind of my first point really, is what I believe people are reacting against really is this dilution of the coaching industry that we've seen. I remember back when this industry really first started taking off online. For those of you who are maybe newer to my work, I've actually run my own online coaching business for over 12 years now. And that's quite a long time, actually. This is a very new industry. So I was here, back in the kind of, the 2012, 13, 14 era when things looked very different. We had a handful of key players in this industry, okay? And what we saw a lot during that time was this was a brand new sparkling opportunity for people who wanted to pivot their career, who wanted to do more purpose-led work, who really wanted to maybe quit their 9-to-5 job and start helping people. And we saw a lot of really fresh, incredible opportunity materializing around that time. And I think where we are now, 12 years later, inevitably, industries go through maturity cycles. So I think we're starting to go through the first of those cycles now, which is all of that stuff has been great. It's served its purpose. I think it's allowed people to start talking about the coaching industry. I don't think it's such a dark and mystical art anymore for people. We know that a coach could be many things. It's not just necessarily the old executive coaches, very corporate men with grey suits walking around with clipboards. I think that was the old understanding of coaching, or obviously a soccer coach or a football coach or something. But I just think that the term coaching, one of the real benefits, I think, of the last 12 years is that the term coaching, this industry, has actually become quite legitimate in that people know that it's a growing and a burgeoning industry. People understand it and see it as an alternative in some respects to maybe the more traditional workforce and the corporate sort of life and things like that. It's rising, I think, alongside things like influencers and social media stuff. It's this kind of third industry, isn't it? Where it's like, wow, what do you mean I can actually set up a business online, work from anywhere, work from my laptop, work with people all over the world, and actually run a legitimate business? I think this has been the beautiful thing about the coaching industry and really what it has helped us achieve over the last decade or so. And like I was saying before, I do think that much of what's happened is that the coaching industry has been diluted as well. It's been sharing a lot of surface level frameworks and things too, which have had their place. And I think, like anything, people want more now. They're kind of like, okay, I've seen the limits of that. Now what's next? And I also think that this is where things like traditional talk therapies and more clinical psychology and stuff like that too. Obviously, obviously there is a massive place for that, and I see coaching and therapy as very, very different streams in this industry, by the way. Depth doesn't necessarily mean that we need to work in the clinical or trauma space, okay? But depth can mean something like we're helping people understand themselves deeply, right? So there's different definitions and different ways rather that we can work with depth, okay? But I also think that people recognize the limits of traditional talk therapy as well. And what we saw was people then moving more into somatic work and body-based work and breath work and things, because people recognize that, no, there's something about working with the body that feels really important too. And now I think what we're starting to see is people like, okay, I've been doing a lot of work with the body, but I sort of still feel like there's something missing in terms of really understanding myself deeply, understanding and activating my sense of purpose and mission in the world. Yes, I feel more regulated. Yes, I feel like I understand my body more. Yes, I understand how things and emotions move through my system. But, okay, what does that actually mean? And how do I use that in terms of arriving at this deeper point of understanding around the self? Because what I'm finding, and I shared this a few episodes ago, what I'm finding right now is that people are entering this place where they're in a crisis of purpose, when they're in a crisis of knowing and understanding their true selves. And I think we're seeing that particularly from a cultural perspective. We're seeing a lot of this corruption, all of the BS, and all of these kind of conspiracy theories that aren't actually conspiracy theories, right, starting to be flushed out. I think people are quite distrustful of governments and media and some of those traditional pillars of society, all right? We're finding that people are being led inwards to really understand who they are. And this is the invitation, for those who are drawn to it. And I think those who have felt drawn to this style of work for a while, it's about helping lead people back home to themselves, because it's only when we work with and understand the self deeply do we really have the opportunity to affect meaningful change in the world. Because until then, we're going to continue being thrown around by our emotions and getting all dysregulated and triggered. And, we're very ineffective when we're in that state. But actually, when we can start to come home to ourselves, understand ourselves deeply, a lot of that stuff just starts to settle down and we can create real change from a place of power. Okay? So that's just my little side commentary on why I think that we've had a dilution of the coaching industry. Okay, people are realizing the limits of some of those surface level kind of tools and tactics and approaches. And I also think there's been some real headway that I guess some of the forefathers of the coaching industry have helped us achieve, which is we now know what coaching is. It's spoken about more regularly. It's seen as a legitimate career path. I think there's been some really juicy inroads there too, right? But going back to this topic of, why so many coaches secretly don't want to be coaches, I think a lot of it has to do with some of those factors that we've seen. Obviously, and this kind of brings me on to the second point too. I think there's been a lot of, not just a dilution, but we've also seen this kind of aspirational lifestyle branding and culture that's really been quite pervasive throughout the coaching industry. Do you guys know what I mean by that? Where I think I see this particularly, if I'm honest, particularly within the business coaching sort of spaces, where we see a lot of ads popping up where people are on private jets or sipping cocktails on beaches, and there's still a lot of that goes on. I think that's lessening, by the way. I think people are seeing through that, particularly the last sort of few years, but there's still a lot of that goes on. And I think many of us still feel the scars of that sort of level of branding, where in order to be taken seriously as a coach, you needed to demonstrate that you had the laptop lifestyle, right? And that you were doing all of the things that people wanted and desired to do themselves. You needed to embody that in your branding so people would want to work with you, so they could be more like you. Yeah. So we've seen a lot of that. And I think, again, it's this showing off a lifestyle which may or may not have been authentic, by the way. I know a lot of people genuinely lived that lifestyle and do so now. And there's many others who maybe were faking it a bit, let's be real. Um, and I think people just got a really bad taste in their mouth because there were some bad actors that maybe leveraged that style of marketing to essentially make everyone else feel kind of bad about their lives. And hey, if I can do it, you can too, and come and be more like me. And I think that really pissed a lot of people off, actually. I think at the time it activated people, but it sort of needled some of their greatest insecurities at the same time. And one thing that I know about the rise of this new era of coaching is that putting truth and authenticity at the center of your brand by embodying that yourself is the biggest so-called marketing tactic that you can lean on. People have incredible bullshit detectors these days, and they want to know that the person that they're working with is truthful, will tell them the truth as well, won't just give them a bunch of band-aids and say, hey, your leg's falling off, but just kind of band-aid it up, right? Rather than actually take them to the hospital to have surgery performed. They want to know. People want to know how bad it is. They want to know the work that's going to be involved to get to the goals that they say they want to achieve. They don't want the quick fixes. They know that that's BS. They know that the 5 steps to, $1 million months is not actually legit. So I think, there's this kind of aspirational lifestyle culture and branding that's been very pervasive in the industry that's put a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths around this term coach, understandably so. Okay. And I think kind of off the back of that too, and this is sort of the last point I want to make around just observations kind of the industry, is that there's been a real commodification of the guru. And what I mean by that is if you're someone who maybe leans more spiritual in your offerings or more of a spiritual coach or guide, you've probably seen this very similar to the aspirational lifestyle culture. There's been a lot of spiritual leaders in this industry, some who have obviously been exposed recently too in things like the Epstein files. We've seen a lot of other gurus too, kind of almost being quite performative in their craft as well. And it just feels like there's this increase in performance. And again, there's aspiration involved in that too, where I think people are like, oh, there's something about this that just feels icky and creepy in my nervous system. Yeah. And and I think for those of you, as I said, that maybe lean more spiritual in the coaching space, there's something about that that's like, I don't want to kind of be associated with that. Yeah. It's like, I don't want to be like this perfectly regulated being all the time in order to be taken seriously as a spiritual guide in this industry. And one of the things about that I love about the work that we do, particularly in the Psychodynamic Coach Academy, the PCA, is that it's always about this return to the true self. And guess what? The true self isn't always prim and proper and perfect and calm and collected and caring and all of these beautiful, perfect, holy things. Sometimes the true self is wild and messy and chaotic and totally imperfect. And so there's a lot about it's a lot about kind of recognizing the full spectrum and truth of who we are. And I think a lot of what's been presented, particularly online by these sort of the gurus and the commodification of guruism, if you like, is that it's almost like we need to attain these unattainable, frankly, these states in order to be considered a success. And I think people, again, with bullshit detectors very incredibly honed, particularly in the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years, that's just not landing with people anymore. And not to mention the unmasking, where unmasking people who have been gurus and maybe have been involved in things that were completely unethical and disgusting. We've seen other gurus that we've put on pedestals, okay, and that's a shadow piece, by the way. When we pedestalize, that's often there's shadow in that. We've seen them fall. We've seen those pedestals fall, and we've seen what's underneath the mask. I'm kind of getting that vision of like the Scooby-Doo, mystery, where they go and they unmask the baddies, right? Not say these people are baddies. Some of them obviously are, but we're seeing a lot of this. We're seeing this kind of revelation of the shadow. And I think all of this combined, when we think about ourselves and our little personal worlds, and we're considering this new career path, we're desiring a pivot, we really want to do something purposeful and meaningful and help others. We look at all of this stuff and it gathers and pools in our nervous system and in our minds. And suddenly there is this compelling draw to do this work. And there's also these kind of questions that the ego and our nervous systems are rightly asking around, but is this all legit? Is this all legit? Is there something just a bit embarrassing about calling myself a coach? Because I don't really want to be associated with these kind of things, I suppose, that have popped up in the industry. So let's check in here before I kind of carry on with what I believe is the solution and kind of next steps around all of this. So check in with yourself here. Is there anything that you'd add to that? What's been your journey here? Now, I got you to check in with how you personally feel about the word coach, but also check in with yourself around the stories. What have you really interpreted those stories as? Have you added to those stories? Has your ego used those stories as excuses also to prevent yourself moving forward? Because this is the other thing. Quite often, when things like fear will come up around taking a big step in or a big leap into a new industry or starting a new career or pivoting, there can be real fear around that. There can be fear of, what if this doesn't work out? What will everybody think? Will they all think that I'm crazy? There's all of the kind of the judgments and the visibility stuff that comes with this. And often what happens is, and this is kind of very much a dynamic process, by the way, where that fear will come up from the subconscious template. And then the ego mind will want to do something with that fear because fear feels really uncomfortable. Fear of taking that next step is enough to really send our ego into all sorts of spirals around, oh, but the term coach doesn't really fit you. Oh, but look at all these bad actors. Oh, I don't know about that industry. I don't know about, is this really legitimate? And so the ego will really spiral and create a lot of commentary and a lot of stories around uncomfortable emotions in an attempt to regulate. And often what that attempt to regulate will look like is pushing that fear back down and staying in our very nice little comfort zone where we don't have to take action. We don't have to do the thing that our soul really is calling us towards because actually, it's all just fake. Yeah. So I really want you to observe these psychodynamic processes within you where the emotion that's underneath can create a real response from our ego mind. Okay. And a lot of those stories, a lot of that commentary from our ego can feel very rational, always a seed of truth. As I was saying before, there's always something there that feels like you're making the adult rational choice. And our role, particularly if we're someone who's drawn to depth, is to examine what's underneath that. What's underneath that? Oh, okay, there's the fear, but what's even underneath the fear? And usually what's under the fear are things like potential, hope, possibility, transformation, change, wisdom, all of those big bright parts, all of that big bright potential and opportunity. That's the thing that really scares us typically. So the fear almost acts as a bit of a cork as well to keep all of that potential down. We do a lot of this work in the PCA, by the way, to really help people look at the architecture of why they do and don't make decisions and move forward in their lives and why they might keep sabotaging and stuff like that. But notice this within yourself. Notice this, what's actually happening within you and within your system. So I think to just share around reflections, sort of next steps, if you want to call it that, and maybe a bit of a reframe or just a discussion about this. I think what's really happening with a lot of people who find that they reject this term coach is that they're actually rejecting a shallow coach culture. Because I think the thing that remains constant, well, I think I've seen remain constant with people, is when you strip away all of the noise and all of the ego stories and the term coach or whatever and all of the pros and cons to that and blah, 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 and all of the noise, if you strip all of that away, the thing that remains true for people is that they want to help people at depth. They're looking for a way to put all of their training, all of their incredible life experience, all of their who they are as a person and their soul's calling, they want to put that to good use. And it's that that really continues to drive people. People are naturally drawn to this depth. People are naturally drawn to working with more root causes around what is it that keeps people stuck and sabotaging? How do I help someone affect real change in their lives? And like I was saying before, working at depth doesn't mean that we need to be working at clinical depth. Doesn't mean that we're working at pathological depth. That firmly belongs in the field of psychology and therapy. But depth means different things. Depth also means really understanding your shadow. Depth means understanding your body and how the shadow moves and lives within the body. Depth means understanding that architecture of how we're set up, what our psyche actually looks like, the different parts of it, the thoughts that we have, how they interact with the emotions, how the emotions interact with shadow and subconscious parts, how those thoughts interact with body. So there's all of these kind of competing energetic forces, right? None of which necessarily are clinical. And, you know, again, a little side note on this, we do a lot of work in the PCA around scope and boundaries, and working with the right people who are ready for depth coaching versus when we need to make a referral, therapeutically and things too. We go into a lot of detail on that. But stripping all of this away, the thing I know that's driving you, that's driving most people who are drawn to this work, is this rejection of the shallow coaching culture and this desire to be part of this new coaching culture where we start to look at depth, when we start to look at the real stuff, the things that really help create transformation in people's lives. And I think the thing that goes along with that too is this rejection of performative and inauthentic tactics. The good news is you don't need to do any of that stuff anymore. That's not going to make you successful in this industry anymore. I know that many people who are on a depth pathway and sort of this, what I call that psycho-spiritual journey, where you're interested in the spiritual aspect, but also the psychology aspect too. I know that many people on that path are really, they value things like honesty and truth and integrity and being genuine, probably above most things, if not all things. And I think when you look back on this time in coaching, this old coaching era that's kind of on its way out, and you've seen a lot of that not be upheld, where it's been quite performative and quite inauthentic. It's like, actually, again, you are the perfect person to lead this new era forward. What you have in terms of your desire, your depth, your perspective, your experience, that is what this new era of coaching is all about. So whether you call yourself a coach or a guide, it doesn't freaking matter, okay? But my point is, it can't hold you back anymore. Because the truth is, it doesn't matter. What matters is who you are, your soul's calling, the fact that you are soul-led in this space, that you have a desire to work with people at depth, that you have a true heart, that you're someone who will tell people the truth, and that you have a toolkit that can genuinely help people, not just give them surface level band-aids. You've got the toolkit that will actually help repair the freaking broken bone, okay, in their system. So it's just knowing that the term coach isn't the issue. The thing that's really going to set you apart in the industry is not your title. It's not what you call yourself. It's who you are. It's who you are being, what you are embodying. That's the bat signal. Okay, that's the bat signal to all of your ideal clients who are going to be watching you, who are waiting and listening for someone like you to come along and stand out in this sea of superficiality and quick fixes and the 90-second, not even the 90-second sound bites anymore, the 9-second sound bites. Okay, people are going to be looking for someone like you. That's your point of difference. It doesn't matter whether you're a coach or whether you're a mentor or a guide or a teacher, whatever you want to call yourself, doesn't actually matter. And this really brings me on to this sort of final point that I want to make, which is again, kind of just referencing the podcast episode I did a few episodes ago around depth coaching as a spiritual invitation, there is this beautiful new way that's emerging, this new era. And I'm seeing it more and more. And I feel so excited. Obviously, I'm a coaching provider in this industry. I do personal coaching work. I train coaches. Um, but I see other people doing work that I'm like, oh yes, like that's what's needed. Okay. And they really stand out. Okay. Because I think people who are drawn to deeper work, they have this sense that they're drawn to it for a reason. And I'm kind of seeing this more and more as people go on this kind of search around purpose and meaning and direction. They're naturally drawn to these deeper topics, whether you're someone who wants to go deeply into the somatics, for example, or deeply into psychodynamics, whatever your interest is. It's starting to be something that's like, oh yeah, that's what's actually needed, right? It's this depth work. And so much of what we do in the PCA is very holistic in nature. We work with the mind, we work with the emotions, we work with the body and the energetics, okay? Because I don't think you can just kind of work in one or the other. They're all connected. But also, I just think this beautiful new era, it allows people to go deeper. It's also, of course, trauma informed and ethical in terms of scope and boundaries as well. I don't know where this weird rivalry has come from between therapists and coaches, but the way that I teach this in the PCA is that these are two very separate professions, and they can support and complement each other beautifully and do. And the type of client that you will work with as a coach is very different to the type of client typically that you'd work with as a therapist. So please don't worry in terms of, oh, am I secretly doing, is it secretly like therapy or, no, the way that we teach it is it's very clear around scope and boundaries and ethics. Okay. So that's just super important because I know that can be a little side issue. I think that people that they worry about. So I think just in terms of this new way, obviously, as I said, this industry is changing rapidly. There is this cultural level of distrust, but also in traditional pillars, I guess, of society, but also this kind of cultural shift towards meaning and purpose and direction. No one's really talking about and capturing that. Okay, we have therapists doing all of the incredible healing work that they do around developmental work and early life trauma, and also dysfunction, all of the clinical stuff. Okay, we have some great life coaches who are doing really good work around goal setting and mindset and performance work. Okay, but there's nothing really in the middle. No one's really talking about how do we help people return to the truth of who they are. Okay, there's spiritual guides out there, okay, who, again, depending on the guide, sort of might not quite be bringing together the somatic and the psychology pieces with spiritual guidance. So it's like I'm seeing these camps, and I guess this is the thing of having some hindsight and perspective in this industry for having been in it for so long. I see these different camps almost. We have the therapeutic camps, we have the somatic camps, we have the spiritual guru type camps, we have the life coaching camps. Everyone's doing their bit. But there's something in the middle that's depth related, obviously non-clinical, but helps people get to the truth of who they are, discover their purpose, meaning, direction, get to that place of what Carl Jung referred to as the true self. And the only way that we can arrive at the true self is through the delayering and the de-armoring and the deconditioning, and really starting to work with those subconscious parts of us, but also to understand our psychic architecture, how the conscious parts of us work with and sometimes fight against the subconscious parts, and where our body's coming into that. So it's this full picture approach. And that's where this industry is really leading us. I think people are starting to wake up to that. And so it really is this incredible time to start sharing these deeper gifts that you have. Like, so many people that come into the PCA actually have these amazing intuitive gifts. They've known that they're intuitive their whole life. They see things, they pick up on undercurrents, they see beyond what's actually in front of them. All of that work is what's needed to become a depth coach. You have to see beyond the story that your clients are telling you. You need to then be able to look almost like you've got X-ray vision at the psychic architecture behind it. Where's the ego coming into that? Where's the shadow in that? What's the fear that's speaking, or another emotional component? Where's that locked up in the energy body? And so being able to almost develop this X-ray vision that blends the psychology, the spiritual, and the somatics, that's where real change is. And guess what? It's such a beautiful approach and super accessible. There's nothing academic about what I teach. There's nothing like, oh, this is all like kind of philosophical and navel gazing. No, it's very practical. We leverage a lot of Carl Jung's work, by the way. Lends itself beautifully to a coaching model, but also other thought leaders too. But so much of this, I think, is going to really help if you're called to this work. It's going to help give you the tools that you need to help people go deeper. It's going to take you on a journey as well. Let's be frank. I think that's probably one of the unexpected side effects of depth coaching, and something that I look for actually in all of my students, which is this openness and this willingness to go on a journey yourself. Even if you've already been on a spiritual path or a path of learning and personal development, there's always layers, okay? And so one of the things that I'm really passionate about as people come through the PCA is that I'm coaching you. We'll work together privately. So you get to experience the toolkits and the frameworks and everything that I share with you personally. We can only take our clients to the places where we've been. We can only take our clients as deep as we've been ourselves. And so that's a big part of this work too. So to summarize, there's this incredible opportunity, I think, to join this new era of coaching. I think there is more and more people who are being called to this work for a reason. And they're not going to get the solutions they need through working with a standard life coach. They're not going to get the solutions they need just by doing somatic work. They need someone that can kind of bring it all together, and through that sort of lens of psychospirituality. Okay, when we talk about depth and a deep understanding, that's where the answers are. And so I'm super thrilled to announce that early bird enrollment is open for the Psychodynamic Coach Academy. This is a brand new cohort that we're introducing just this year. So this is our cohort that starts on the 22nd of June. Typically, we run this only twice a year. We're experimenting with running it 3 times a year, just because there have been there's increased demand, obviously, but also just we're working with different time zones. We are a truly global training company now. We have people from all over, from obviously Europe and the UK through to America and Canada, but also South Africa, Pakistan, Australia, New Zealand, Philippines, like all over. We're global, right? So we need to make sure that we're just offering times now, cool times that work for people in different time zones. And so this particular round is optimized for those who are in the US and Canada. We're very aware that our last round, which started back in March, really didn't work for people in the US and Canada. So we've wanted to create this special round for people who are specifically based there, but also in Australia and New Zealand as well. That surprisingly works quite well, that combination together. So that's where we're focused for this particular round. It's a 16-week program. Early bird pricing is currently in effect, where you have the opportunity to save $1,500 on the cost of tuition. We also have an extended 10-part payment plan as well, meaning that you can get started with your first payment of $550, followed by monthly subsequent payments after that of $550 for 10 months. So we have that too. We wanted to make this as accessible as we possibly can. The way that you get yourself enrolled, you can obviously check out our website. That will be hooked up around this episode. But your step to really getting started with enrollment is to just book a consultation call to begin with. It's no pressure. You and I will have a chat. We'll jump on Zoom together. I'm really keen to hear more about you. I want to make sure your questions are answered. I want to make sure that you feel comfortable that this is a good fit for you. I'll share more about the program too, and what we're looking for, obviously, from our perspective, to make sure that we can discern together whether this is the right next step for you. All right. So definitely check that out. If you do want to book a consultation call, my diary is open. Again, that will be linked up. It's linked on our website. Just book your call, choose a time, and you and I will meet and we can have a nice, juicy chat about what's next for you. All right. But until next time, if this is where I leave you, have an amazing rest of your week and looking forward to the next one. Take care. Bye.